Good evening, everybody. We are live from London. Good evening to Reine Okuliar, and that we are welcoming and thanking Reine. And good evening to the members of the BNC Club, London and Paris, and also to des Amis du Palais de Tokyo. We are welcoming you on this live webinar and masterclass about Kader Attia. I'm going to start by presenting Reine Okuliar, who is an art historian, an art writer, and a freelance curator. She has upon her active more than 40 exhibitions that she organized globally, and she has co-founded a gallery in New York for 3 days, and then she moved to London, and she, as a collector and a specialist in art, she has decided to go back to the Courtauld Institute, and so we are launching with the BNC Club London a series of masterclasses on art history and on contemporary art specifically. And Reine has done an MA from the Courtauld Institute, and she was awarded the Courtauld Prize for her essay on Kader Attia. So that has a title, The Continuous Repair of Chaos. She is currently doing a PhD at the University of Edinburgh, as the English would say, Edinburgh. Sorry, je suis désolée, c'était un passage. So today she's going to talk about Kader Attia. Kader is a French Algerian artist. He lives between Berlin and Alger. He was born in 1970 in France and lived and grew up at Sarcelles and Garges-les-Gonesse, and also in Algeria near Bab el-Oued. He spent several years in Congo and in South America. We all remember as the friends of Palais de Tokyo, the Fluxus Art Project friends, and the friends from the members from London who have seen both two major exhibitions, one at Palais de Tokyo, which was entitled L'un et l'autre in 2018, and the other one year after at the Hayward Gallery in London in 2019, which was an exhibition that has presented his very important installation that was at Documenta 2012. So Reine is going to present the artist, present everything, and then we will have a moment for question and answers, and we would please ask you to go to the chat box and ask your questions whenever you want, but I will all ask them at the end. So Reine.
Well, thank you, Attia, for this introduction. And so it's the first masterclass. So I'm very happy to make this first masterclass with the BNC about Kader Attia. So as Attia reminded us, first I will share my screen with you. Sorry. Did that work? So Kader Attia. Who is he? So he's, as Attia reminded us, he's a Franco-Algerian artist who was born in 1970 and grew up between Bab el-Oued in Algeria, Garges-les-Gonesse in France, studied in Paris, in Barcelona, had his first solo exhibition in Brazzaville, and he now is based in Berlin and Algiers. And he came to prominence on the international stage in 2012 with the presentation of his installation, which is here, The Repair from Occident to Extra-Occidental Cultures at Documenta 13 in Kassel. And since this breakthrough, so by the way, this work is generally referred to as The Repair. And since his breakthrough in Germany, Attia has exhibited internationally. So one question that I would like to answer is why choose him as the focus of this first masterclass. And besides the fact that he's an artist who I really love and who I wrote extensively about at the Core Toad, which are already two big facts, Attia is often tagged as a post-colonial artist. And I thought that looking together at his art will help us understand some of the notions around post-colonialism and decolonization that are at the center of many exhibitions, debates, and books at the moment. So in London, where I'm based, he had two exhibitions, one at the Whitechapel Gallery in 2014, called Continuum of Repair, The Light of Jacob's Ladder, which was a site-specific commission. And in 2019, he had his first major survey in the UK at the Hayward Gallery, which was called Kader, Attia, the Museum of Emotion. So hopefully, for those who are in London, I will talk mostly about the works that were at the Hayward Gallery, and it will bring back memories of work seen in real life, as we now say. So one of the very first work that was on view at the Hayward Gallery was a 4-minute video called Oil and Sugar No. 2. And here we have 4 stills from the video. So the first one here is a large white cube composed of smaller white sugar cubes, all set on a tray. Then there is a very simple gesture during that video where you see the artist pouring oil onto the cube. So you have this like very stark contrast of colors, but you have this very captivating mix when you're in front of the video. Like, you know that there's going to be a collapse, and you have this slow collapse, and somehow you're captivated. You keep looking at it. But what is it that we're looking at exactly in this video? And actually, Kader Attia brings us back first to the 17th century, when Europe became a great consumer of sugar. So the 17th century is a period that we generally refer to as the early modern period. And we know that the flip side of this appetite for sweetness was slavery in the New World and in the sugar plantation. So then, as I said, you have this gesture pouring oil. And this brings us to the 19th century and to the industrial era. So what we have really are 2 raw materials that have been the cornerstones of Western modern economies for the past 4 centuries. And their production and exploitation required the subjection of others. And this financial success of the West is epitomized in architecture, in modern architecture, by the white cube. So what we're looking at in this video is modernity falling apart. So then in the same room, we had another video that was related because the curator did a great job, which was La Tour Robespierre. So here we're not suggesting a modern building. We have a tower that is a typical modern building, which is a complete ode to geometry. You have squares and diamonds and rectangles. But what it is an habitation à loyer modéré, so a council estate. And the video consisted of a drone that was going up the building in Paris. So it's in Paris suburbs. So you were going up, and it really looked like prison cells. And the video is very silent, very desolated. The building is derelict. And you sort of hope then when you're going to reach the top, you're going to feel liberated. But what happened at the top is that you have this landscape that shows you that there is just more and more of the same. So if you put those 2 videos together, in the first one, we looked at the past. We came to understand that colonization, slavery, exploitation are linked to modernism, that the early economies could not have developed without slavery, and the industrial era required the colonization, exploitation of oil-rich territories. So the question really is, what does the second video is telling us? What is Attia trying to achieve by bringing us to Paris's banlieues today? And so this is where post-colonialism intervened. So the founding father of post-colonialism is a man called Edward Said, who wrote in 1978 a book called Orientalism. So it's a very thick book, and I will very, very briefly say that in it, Said rejects the Orientalist studies. So the image of the East that is conveyed in the West, that is a Western construct, a sort of myth of the Oriental. So at some point that started in the 18th century onwards. And so he asks question at some point like, has anyone ever met that Oriental? And so what he says is that this construct has become a discourse, and his aim is to reject and to dismantle that discourse. So 15 years later, he writes another book called Culture and Imperialism, where the tone is less confrontational. And there he considers literature of the 19th and 20th century, Western literature, and how it described Africa, India, the Caribbean. And it demonstrates that there is an ideological discourse of European domination. But what is key to him, and that's something he shares with T.S. Eliot, is that we have to study the past to inform the present in order to build a better future. And that brings us back to Kader Attia, because in the first video, we saw the modern era that brought colonization. In the second video, we see that we still live through the consequences, and that we have this landscape of council estate where we cannot see a single human being. And why is that? It's because the whole principle of colonization is to make the other invisible. The colonized need to be civilized. Their descendants must be unseen in council estate. So now that we have understood the past and seen the present, and that in fairness, it's pretty grim, like Said, Attia considers the future. And that brings us to a notion that is absolutely central in his work, which is the notion of repair. And so what does he mean by repair? So the usual sense of repair is to try and, well, when we repair something, we try and bring it back to its original state. We want to obliterate a breakage, an injury. We want it to be back to its original state. For Attia, repair needs to acknowledge the passing of time. So you have works like this. So it leaves the injury visible. It shows the scars so that you can listen to the different histories. So the notion, it's a notion that he started to work on when he discovered this fabric, which is an African fabric that was damaged and that had been repaired with some French Vichy fabric. So when he saw it, he realized that to have a new item, a new piece of cloth, you had a confrontation of the colonized and colonizer, and he started to work on that notion. And I think that it brings him quite close to another philosopher called Édouard Glissant, who explains a notion which is creolization. And to explain this notion, Glissant uses an historical moment, which is the uprooting of populations in slave ships. So what you have to imagine in Glissant philosophy is people from Africa, but from different countries, different tribes, different languages. And all of a sudden, they're separated from where they're from their families, etc., put into slave ship, and we give them, although at that moment, a new identity. They become slave. And so they're all together and they have to figure out how to live with that identity, create a new language, potentially, to communicate with each other. And this is creolization. In Glissant's philosophy, there is no moral judgment on creolization. The world is as such. There are connections that are created, whether it's not an ode to hybridity, is not to say that métissage is something amazing. It is just the fact that there's going to be collisions of cultures. What do they bring? We don't know. They might bring something negative, a resistance, which in this case is racism, can bring a fantastic artwork, in which case it's a positive outcome. So for Attia, repair also has its origin in the breaking point. He calls it the injury. And so for him, he creates those connections. Those connections are his artwork. And I do believe that those artworks are proposals for the future. So what I would suggest, because this notion of repair is so central to Attia's work, is to look at 3 artworks and to see how repair is used in those artworks. To do so, for the first work, we'll take a quick detour to the British Museum. So this is the Enlightenment Galleries at the British Museum. So on the right, you have the beautiful photo that I took from the website. On the left, you have the not so beautiful photo that I took myself, but that shows that what it really is cabinets of curiosities. And that cabinets of curiosity started in the 17th century. So it's a phenomenon that is very associated with the discovery of the New World. So collectors, like famously someone like Sloane, started collecting the natural world. So birds, shells, like whatever you can see here. And the artificial, so there would be art, sculpture, etc. And they start classifying them, categorizing them. So it's an exercise in accumulation, definition, classification. So there is a sense of control of this new knowledge. And so it would take whole rooms at the time, and we can have a difficult time today imagining the work that it took to create those cabinets of curiosity, because let's say you're bringing a rare crab from Brazil to Paris or London on a boat, a trip that is going to take at best a few weeks. And so there's massive developments, incredible developments at the time in, say, taxidermy. And no idea what I talked about a crab when I could have said the extent they would go to pin a crocodile on a ceiling. So these collections, here there's a Rubens, like to show as well, like how it could take entire rooms. They then became museums and libraries. So in London, like the Sloane Cabinets of Curiosity became the British Library, the British Museum. And by the 19th century, we started separating the natural and the artificial. So the art, what was considered art, went to the National Gallery. And that's generally Western art, and we started the Renaissance, etc. And what was ethnography went to other places, for instance, the British Museum. So if you want to look at a Byzantine icon, you go to the British Museum. So the wonders from the colony were in those rooms. And then you could, at the Hayward, for instance, but in other places as well, step into a room like this, created by Kader Attia. So it does resemble Cabinet of Curiosity, or it's very much acquainted to the Enlightenment room at the British Museum. So in one of his talks, the director of the Hayward Gallery, who is curator of the exhibition, talked about this room as an alternative ethnographic museum. So here if we look at one of those closers though, what we have is a cheetah. So similarly to a 17th century collector, you would have to bring it back, put it in a vitrine, having a taxidermy exercise, etc. But this time it is next to an African mask of a cheetah. And you have many different rituals and tribes, but generally speaking, a mask for African rituals is inhabited by the spirit of what it represents. So here you have the spirit of the cheetah that in this vitrine is reunited to the physical cheetah, so that we finally, through a connection, so there was an injury, through a connection, it has been repaired. And so he does it in that room in particular with like different animals, as we can see. So the work is called Measure and Control. So the injury really is the fact that we've been building up those categories. The repair is the reunion by combining the cultures. So I couldn't have a masterclass about Kader Attia without talking about the repair. So full title, The Repair from Occident to Extra-Occidental Cultures, which was his seminal work of 2012 at Kassel. So it was shown at the Hayward Gallery for the first time since 2012. And here is a detail of the installation. This is the vitrine where this fabric I was talking about that first initiated his research into repair was. So it's one of my poor pictures, but as you see, it resembles this. I took this is another of my pictures, but it's just to show that the lights were very dim. And the reason they shows that lighting, it's because that's generally the type of lighting that you find in an ethnographic museum. So now back to the wonderful picture of the Hayward Gallery. So when you come, so it's an entire room. So when you come in to see the repair, it's very impressive. You have towering bookshelves that are spread across this enormous room. So the dim light, so it's a bit intimidating and you don't really know how to approach the work at first. As far as I'm concerned, I slowly reverted to my familiar habits. And so I walked towards the bookshelf to try and see what were the titles. And then you realize that the books are bolted down, which Kader Attia is known to be a bibliophile. And so I tend to be one as well. And I barely dare scribbling on the book. So I can't even imagine what it meant to him to bolt them down. So it's a very strong gesture to show that we tend to conceive knowledge as something immutable. Then as you go in the room, you realize that there are a few themes across those books. The First World War and its soldiers, including those from the colonies. He talks about primitive art, mainly African statuary. You have medical treatises on surgery in particular. And you have Greek and Renaissance art, which are the basis of the canons of what we think is beautiful in the West. Then at the back, there was a video that was projected, and you had slides like this one, where you have the faces of the gueule cassée. So the gueule cassée, it's literally broken faces. It refers to the about 15,000 French World War I survivors who had their faces mutilated. And there were attempts to repair their faces, but not in the sense that I define the way Kader Attia uses, literally trying to bring them back to their original state. So when the surgery failed, they would use prosthetics, they would use masks, and the question is really who those masks were for. Because at the end of the war, France desperately needs labor. They need to rebuild, to reconstruct, and they really need to have, everybody needs to have their spirits up. So all of a sudden, these heroic citizens become national burden. No one wants this broken masculinity, and it's better left unseen. So the thing is that they share this status with colonial soldiers. So you had, for instance, the tirailleurs sénégalais, so soldiers from Senegal who helped during World War I. No one wanted to know, to publicize the fact that they had helped. They needed to go back to, not to a heroic status, but to go back to their status of colonized and of subjection. So there is this common ground between the gueule cassée and the colonized soldiers, that all of a sudden we no longer need them and we really want to hide them. So that is like, so Kader Attia in this work make the injury really, really clear. So where is the repair? So the repair are those sculptures on the shelves. Here you have, I mean, the epitome of like the process of creolization and repair. On the one hand, he presents those African, so either scarified bust, or like here he has like this thing in his mouth, which is considered like a beautiful artifact in the culture. But he's made in black Carrara marble. And so marble being Carrara marble, like we immediately think Renaissance, Michelangelo. So he's bringing, he's like connecting the two. And at the same time, he did the wooden gueule cassée sculpture. So all of a sudden they become like totem. And he used African sculptures to actually make them. So it was made locally. So the last work I will talk about is this one, Mirrors and Masks. So here we need to take another detour. So we're not going to the British Museum, we're going to the Grand Palais in Paris in 2008, where there was this exhibition, Picasso et les Maîtres. And so it really looked at the emulation influences that Picasso had. And here, for instance, you have Ingres to the left with an odalisque en grisaille. And so you see those type of comparison like throughout the exhibition. There was like Velasquez and de Ménine. And in this exhibition, there is not a single African mask. Something that was noted by Kader Attia. Why? Because Picasso was introduced to African statuary early in the 20th century by Vlaminck. And he is known to have gone to the Trocadero Palace, where the ethnographic museum was at the time, with André Malraux in 1904. And he describes this discovery of African statuary and Iberian sculptures as as key to him. And so you have, and in 1907, you have Les Demoiselles d'Avignon, which is a cornerstone of Western art, the start, shall we say, of Cubism. And here I copied and pasted the description by the MoMA. So Les Demoiselles d'Avignon marks a radical break from traditional composition and perspective in painting. It depicts 5 naked women composed of flat, splinter planes whose faces were inspired by Iberian sculpture and African masks. So it is not a fantasy that Picasso was inspired by masks. You could have easily have those types of comparison during the exhibition at the Grand Palais, but there were none. Those are a comparison that I found in history books. And so Kader Attia actually called the curators of the Grand Palais and told them, well, there's a problem, like there are some masters that you forgot. So apparently he did that to no avail. And so his response to that injury to the history of art was to create mirrors and masks. And so you have this African mask covered in those broken mirrors. And what's interesting is that wherever there's mirror, you can't help it, or at least maybe that's me being vain, but you sort of can't help to approach it. And when you do, you look like a Picasso. You become this cubist sculptor. So I will stop with those three works that we've detailed a little bit, and I will just conclude by saying that what I find quite interesting, though, is that wherever you read, Kader Attia is generally tagged as post-colonialist, as I said at the beginning, which I find a bit contradictory considering the fact that he's trying so much to shatter categories and to encourage us to shatter categories. And nevertheless, we're so used to that type of discourse that we can't help but tag him and to find a category in which to put him. So, well, something else maybe to repair, but for now I will just get you back to Anne-Pierre and maybe open the Q&A if there's any questions.
Thank you so much, Reine. That was a fantastic presentation of the work of Kader, and especially enlightening for those of us that had the privilege of seeing him grow as a major French artist from his different exhibitions and the Prix Marcel Duchamp in 2016. We saw him also at the Biennale of Venice with an installation of couscous videos. We saw him in Art Basel Unlimited with when he broke all the showcase mirrors of the installation Arab Spring. And we will be able to go back to La Colonie soon, which is a place that he had opened in 2017, I think, near the Gare du Nord, where it's a cafe, it's an agora, and his idea is that people are welcome to come and eat his mother's couscous, and then discuss openly about all these different subjects.